Hey everyone, welcome. This is Caitlin Coleman. I'm Water Education Colorado's Publications and Digital Resources Managing Editor. Thank you for joining us for today's drought webinar. Before we get started, just a few quick notes. First, please remain muted during our presentations. We'll allow like 15 minutes or so for Q&A at the end of our time together. And so at that point, we'll invite you to pose questions. If something occurs to you during the presentations, you are welcome to type your questions into the chat just to log them, but we'll still answer them during Q&A at the end. Also, our webinar is being recorded. We'll share the recording sometime in the next week. There are a handful of folks here who are new to Water Education Colorado, and we also have a lot of old friends on the line. But if you're new, a quick intro to our work. WECO works to ensure that Coloradans are informed on water issues and equipped to make decisions that guide our state to a sustainable water future. We are a non-advocacy organization committed to providing educational opportunities and engaging Coloradans around water. We do this in a variety of ways through leadership programs, water news coverage and publications, and also educational programs like this webinar. If you are interested in more webinars and more drought coverage, we have a few things in the works. We're exploring more drought webinars, but nothing is set yet on that front, but stay tuned. We're also planning to cover this year's drought as well as impacts on interstate compacts in the spring 2027 issue of Headwaters magazine. So if you have stories you want to share through the magazine or through a webinar, I'm always happy to connect. On the webinar front, we're also working on an AI and water webinar, which is scheduled for September 2nd. So I'll pop that link into the chat in a few minutes if you are interested in learning more and registering. A few more things about WECO. You might have noticed that this webinar is free to members and students and people who are employees of organizations with memberships. Of course, we rely on our members, supporters, and volunteers like our speakers to make our work happen, so consider joining if you haven't already. And if you want to visit with us in person and support WECO, our annual fundraising gala, the President's Reception, is coming up in just 1 month on September 10th at the Denver Botanic Gardens, so join us. Today's webinar is our second offering in a series of drought webinars. Our aim with these has been to highlight experiences from this challenging summer. If you find yourself unmuted, try to mute yourself just to reduce any kind of feedback. I'll do the same for you. So we want to kind of highlight experiences and look toward the future and highlight kind of examples of innovation and collaboration like we're doing today. So I'm really excited for all of us to learn more about how this Colorado River Historic Users Pool Drought Program operated and came together. We'll hear from 3 really great speakers today. First from Caleb Foy with the Colorado River District, followed by Luke Gingrich with JUB Engineers, and then finally from Siri Roman with Eagle River Water and Sanitation District. So first, Caleb, I'll introduce and then turn it over to him. Caleb Foy is a Senior Water Resources Engineer with the Colorado River Water Conservation District, where he provides technical expertise to West Slope water users and serves as the district's technical lead for the Gunnison River Basin. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Engineering and a Master of Science in Civil Engineering, both from Colorado State University. Prior to joining the River District in October 2025, Caleb spent 15 years with the Colorado Division of Water Resources. During his tenure there, he held several key positions, most recently serving as Deputy Division Engineer for Water Division 5, Colorado River Basin. And with that, I'll turn it over to Caleb.
Thanks, Caitlin. I really appreciate that kind of introduction. And thanks, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. It's really great to see some familiar faces and names as well as some that I don't know. But yeah, we'll jump right in here. Before we get going, I did want to at least provide some information to the group about what the Colorado River District is, who we are, and what we do. So the River District, Colorado River Water Conservation District, also known as the River District, was formed in 1937 at a time when Trans Mountain diversions were starting to be developed, and it was really recognized that the West Slope needed a voice. So the River District has a two-part mission. First, we lead in the protection, conservation, use, and development of water resources within our 15 county district. And second is we safeguard for Colorado all waters of the Colorado River to which the state is entitled. So as you'll see, as we start talking about this year's drought mitigation activities, they truly do fall squarely within the first part of that mission in regard to the protection, conservation, use, and development of water within our 15 county district. I should say, we certainly recognize that if it weren't for our taxpayers, the district wouldn't exist. So we never lose sight of that, and just always like to echo our appreciation to the taxpayers of the 15 counties that we represent, and really echo the fact that we really truly are here to serve their interests, including in regard to some of these drought mitigation activities that we'll discuss. So before we jump into what mitigation actions the River District took, I do think it's important to set the stage and talk about, the poor hydrologic conditions or the drought that especially this year has come to fruition. So this is a really nice graphic that I like to show from our friends over at the Colorado Climate Center. And basically what it does is it puts for each one of these dots on the graph, they're plotted by average temperature here on the y-axis and accumulated precipitation on the x-axis. So what you can see is these are that average temperature and precipitation for the period October through June for each year of a 132-year period record. And these years can be plotted in four different quadrants. So we have this warm and dry quadrant in the upper left, warm and wet in the upper right, cool and dry in the lower left, and cool and wet in the lower right. And what you can see here is that 2026, indicated by that star, truly does fall squarely within that warm and dry category as the first warmest and the ninth driest October through June in that 132-year period. Now, other years, other notable drought years, I should say, just to show you where they are relative to 2026 in this graphic, are 2018, 2012, 2002, and 1977. And as you can see, most of those do fall within that warm and dry category. And certainly 2026 really stands out because of those warm temperatures that we've experienced water year to date for that October through June period. So just kind of setting the stage for average average temperature and precip. Now you might be asking ourselves, was Colorado or the western slope of Colorado, were we in this alone in seeing these unprecedented warm temperatures? And this map shows that, in fact, we were not. This was pretty widespread throughout the Western United States. So what this is a map of is that November through April average temperature percentiles. And what you can see is in this dark red area, that was the warmest November through April that those areas have seen since 1895. So again, just widespread warm temperatures over that winter time period, November through April. Even extending out from that, you can see in the darker shades of orange, although not the warmest, still much above average. So as indicated by this map, winter really did just basically skip the Western United States this year. So let's take a look at what those temperatures, what they did to our snowpack. So this is a satellite imagery of the Blue River Basin. And just for some context, right here, this is Dillon Reservoir, and down here is Green Mountain Reservoir. And so this is a series of graphics, satellite imagery taken starting in the beginning of March 8th, and extending through the end of March. And as you can see, those record warm temperatures throughout March truly did a number on our snowpack, where we had pretty good aerial extent of snow coverage throughout the basin starting in the beginning of the month. But by the end of the month, those mid and low elevation snow was truly decimated, frankly. And it just never bounced back. And this is a time of year, I should note, that we would typically expect snow to still be accumulating and not melting off at such a rapid pace. So with that, as you might imagine, this does have implications. And I'll talk a little bit about the importance of Green Mountain Reservoir to Water Division 5 here shortly. But I did want to set the stage to show, what these low precipitation and warm temperatures did to inflows to Green Mountain Reservoir. So this is a chart that shows unregulated inflows from April through July coming into Green Mountain Reservoir going back till about the late 1930s. So as you can see, 2026 here at the very far right, circled in red, had the second lowest inflow on record. The only lower inflow was in 2002, and it was just a bit lower than this year, where we had 98,000 acre feet of unregulated inflow to Green Mountain Reservoir, which again is just about a third of average. So as you can imagine, this has drastic implications, especially to a reservoir that's so important to water users throughout Water Division 5, the Colorado River Basin. So just digging into this a little bit further, Green Mountain Reservoir, it's a very complicated system, and I don't have time to get into the nitty-gritty of every aspect, but I do want to at least paint a high-level picture of some of the pools in Green Mountain Reservoir and their importance. So the first pool I'll reference is this 52,000 acre foot CBT pool. And what this pool does is that it's allocated for the Colorado Big Thompson project, which I should note, Green Mountain Reservoir was a component of Senate Document 80, which was the founding legislation for the Colorado Big Thompson project, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, but it's a large trans-mountain diversion project which takes water from the headwaters of the Colorado River over to the Front Range. So that first pool, 52,000 acre feet, is used to allow CBT to continue to divert water to the east slope against a senior downstream call here in Water Division 5, again referred to as that CBT pool. The next pool is a 100,000 acre foot, what's referred to as a power pool. And this power pool has several components which are important to water users within Water Division 5. First of all is the historic users pool. And so that's 66,000 out of the 100,000 acre foot power pool. And that historic user pool is used for, it basically allows domestic and irrigation water users that were perfected prior to October of 1977. It basically allows those users to continue to divert against a senior downstream call at either Shoshone or Cameo. So again, the importance of this pool is it allows those users to continue to divert, not be subject to curtailment against any senior downstream call on the main stem. Similarly, the siltwater pool operates in a similar manner, except it specifically allows the Siltwater Conservancy District to continue to divert water. Now, the Silt Project is a project located north of Silt, Colorado, and it provides an irrigation supply to Silt Mesa. For those who might be familiar with Rifle Gap Reservoir or Harvey Gap Reservoir, those are two of the reservoirs associated with that project. But again, very important, the silt pool is in Green Mountain Reservoir to allow those users to continue to divert for irrigation against its senior downstream Cameo call. And then the third pool of water that's important to recognize out of the 100K pool or the power pool is this contract pool. So it's 20,000 acre feet, about half of it, 10,000 roughly, is acre feet is currently contracted out of that pool. And basically, a lot of those contracts are used for plans for augmentation throughout Division 5, which again allow junior water users to divert at times when there's a senior downstream call at either Shoshone or Cameo. So at the end of the day, all of these pools you can tell are extremely important because what they do is they provide a legal mechanism or replacement supplies to allow out of priority diversions to continue even when there are senior downstream calls. So as you might imagine, when we looked at those record low inflows into Green Mountain Reservoir, there was an implication to these pools filling this year. And that implication was as follows here shown in the reservoir diagram. We see that the CBT pool did fill to its full 52,000 acre feet. The silt pool and the historic user pool filled to about 2/3 full, being just over 3,000 acre feet for the silt pool and about 44,000 acre feet for the historic user pool. And unfortunately, the contract pool in Green Mountain Reservoir did not see a drop of water this year. So that has not yet to fill at all. And again, there's large scale division-wide implications from this lack of filling these pools in Green Mountain Reservoir. So, and that's what we'll again kind of discuss here. So kind of outlining what those impacts are. Again, it's all about The concept or the impact of those pools not filling is that these junior water users would be subject to curtailment by calls either at Shoshone or Cameo. And the Division of Water Resources administers water and would curtail out of priority diversions, the depletions from which are not adequately replaced during times of downstream senior calls. So this, as you can imagine, this was very concerning for the River District. When we saw the writing on the wall earlier this spring that Green Mountain Reservoir wasn't going to fill some of these pools at all and some to a limited extent, we really knew that this was the time to take action. Again, it falls squarely within the first mission of the River District, and we thought it was very important to protect our water users to the greatest extent possible throughout the division. So how were we able to achieve this? Well, we were able to strategically use contract supplies that the River Districts or the River Districts Enterprise owns in both Wolford Mountain Reservoir and Rudai Reservoir here. And the concept here is to release water pursuant to certain plans that protects cities and towns, agricultural producers from being curtailed given poor hydrologic conditions and senior downstream calls. I should note that, when you're releasing water from upstream reservoirs, namely Wolford and Rudai, and delivering it downstream, certainly a majority of which is going to the Cameo diversion that Luke will talk a little bit about here later. That water is providing environmental flows and in-stream benefits all the way from the headwaters down to Cameo. So that's another important thing to recognize is kind of the multi-purpose benefit from some of these releases that the River District has identified from our contract supplies in Wolford and Rudai reservoirs. So specifically, I did want to dive a little bit more closely into kind of these actions. So there was roughly 15,000 acre feet of River District supplies identified that were made available for this drought response. And a huge shout out to our colleagues over at the Colorado Water Conservation Board as we entered into a temporary expedited loan with CWCB for just under $600,000 to pay for a portion of this 15,000 acre feet. Notably, the other portion or the remaining supply was paid for out of the River District's Community Funding Partnership Program. So again, a huge shout out to CWCB to help implement this multi-benefit project. But the 15,000 acre feet was basically used in a couple different ways. The first was an emergency substitute water supply plan. So of the 15,000, about 2,400 was allocated to this plan to protect hundreds of municipal and domestic water supplies throughout Division 5. So these were water supplies that had historically relied on either the historic user pool or the Green Mountain contract pool, or users who had an augmentation plan that might not have contemplated a full month of call in June. But really, the emergency substitute water supply plan was developed and approved by the state engineer's office to prevent curtailment of those water users during times of senior downstream call, given that the replacement supply they historically relied upon just wasn't available this year. I should note, and Serial will shine some insight into this, but we also asked those municipal and domestic water supplies to limit outdoor watering. And we did that knowing that we had a limited supply of 15,000 acre feet, and that in a year like this, every drop of water put on a residential lawn is one less drop of water available to our agricultural producers that our communities rely upon. So it was really important for the River District to focus on and impose kind of these limitations on outdoor watering under the emergency SWSP. The other portion of the 15,000 acre feet went to what we call the Grand Valley Irrigation Plan. So we worked with the irrigators in the Grand Valley to basically lower their demands or their target for the amount of water they were requesting at the Cameo diversions, and which basically promotes a couple of things. It allowed upstream reservoirs to legally fill in priority with a reduced demand down at Cameo. And it also allowed for our upstream irrigators who historically relied on the historic user pool to basically stay in priority or have an adequate HUP supply to continue diverting for a longer period of time. And this really helped them at least get one cutting of hay in up in the high country. As a result of the Grand Valley participating in this plan, we're providing them a pool of water, which is actually currently starting to be utilized, where they can kind of flexibly pull on this pool of water here later in the season as conditions continue to dry out and they're hitting peak demand with things like peach harvests in the Grand Valley. Now, again, I really do want to reiterate, a couple of different things in regard to the collaboration throughout the basin, both with municipalities and domestic water suppliers, reducing their target, or excuse me, limiting outdoor irrigation, as well as the Grand Valley reducing their target. And again, this all couldn't have been done without the cooperation of the CWCB. So with that, that's kind of a real quick overview of the River District's actions, and I'm going to now pass it over to Luke to talk a little bit more about the irrigators and how they've operated this season.
Thanks, Caleb. I'm going to give Luke a quick introduction. So next up, we have Luke Gingrich with JUB Engineers. Luke has over 20 years of experience in water resources and agricultural engineering, water rights, and hydraulics. Luke is a leader in agricultural water use and irrigation infrastructure engineering. He works extensively with local, state, and federal government agencies, water conservation and conservancy districts, irrigation districts, and canal companies, and multiple private water rights holders on water resources planning and project implementation, and has successfully guided many clients through the decision-making process as it applies to construction of water resources infrastructure. Luke.
Awesome. Thanks, Caitlin, for the kind introduction. And Caleb, I appreciate the introduction, just how this season went. I was kind of laughing to myself as you were talking how many Teams meetings you and I have both been on this year. I don't think we expected that at the beginning or in the middle of the winter. So as Caitlin said, my name is Luke Gingrich. Appreciate the opportunity. I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to roll through just a little bit of the operations in the Grand Valley, just as an introduction, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the operations that are specific to this year, and then I'll kind of leave the rest up if there's more clarification needed to questions at the end. So happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the Grand Valley, this is a map of the Grand Valley and Grand Valley irrigation providers. There's 5 entities that divert out from the Colorado River, and those are referred to as the Cameo Call, as Caleb said. And then there is one diversion from the Gunnison River, that's the Redlands Water and Power Company. So out of the Colorado side, we've got 4 entities that divert at the roller dam. If you've seen the iconic roller dam, those are the Grand Valley Water Users Association, Orchard Mesa Irrigation District. I'm a consultant for both of those organizations. They also divert the Palisade Irrigation District and Mesa County Irrigation District at that same location. And then Grand Valley Irrigation Company has a diversion in Palisade. If you've ever been over the Highway 6 bridge, you'll see their diversion just south of the highway. Okay, so this is just a picture of the roller dam. Most of you have probably seen this as you drive through Tibet Canyon, entering the Grand Valley. The left-hand side of this photo would actually is where Interstate 70 is now. Then this is a picture of the Grand Valley Irrigation Company's diversion structure back in the early 1900s when that was being repaired. And then this is a schematic of Cameo Call operations in a normal year. So there's 1,950 CFS of irrigation water rights that are diverted at the Cameo Call, and there's an additional 400 CFS of power. So I like this schematic just because it demonstrates just kind of how complicated operations are in the Grand Valley. Just in a normal year, let alone a historic drought. Going into 2026, this winter, we knew this was going to be a challenge. We were watching snowpack, and it was lining up to be about as dry as 2002. And so we were preparing for that. And then we were also preparing our operations to act like 2018. You heard Caleb talk a little bit about a target flow. And that's a term we've been developing over the last couple of years to help us function during some of these periods when it's drier than we would like, and there's not enough reservoir water to satisfy all of the demands in the Grand Valley. But that March heat wave that Caleb spoke of, that really changed the arithmetic for us. Just a couple figures here. The one on the left is, there was a time in March when the forecasted peak at Cameo was before April 1st and at about 2,500 CFS, and a median number for a Cameo peak is well over 10,000 in mid-June. So we were really in a tough spot. And you can see there how drastically the Colorado headwaters snowpack fell apart on us at the end of the season. So as Caleb described, really pretty well, we were, preparing this year for, we knew it was going to be a tough year. We were preparing for it to be a substitution year. And if some of you are familiar with the operations around Dillon Reservoir and Williams Fork and Wolford and some of the other buckets in this basin, substitution years aren't that common, but they do happen. We were preparing for that. We were preparing for what we call conservation operations down here, and we were definitely preparing for a reduced mid-year target flow. So that's a purposeful reduction of our demand, in the middle of the season to extend reservoir supplies. That March heat wave hit, and we really had to pivot quickly to basically running. We ran some basic tests on our infrastructure to see how low can our infrastructure function, because we were projecting flows at Cameo that we'd just never seen before, because that HUP bucket that Caleb spoke of, it wasn't going to fill. It didn't fill. It got to about 2/3 full, but we were anticipating operating mid-season with just natural flow and no storage water being sent down. So testing infrastructure, preparing for severe restrictions, conservation operations, and a reduced target. And then we really got into reduced target flow operations in an attempt to hold off a call and store more water in that HUP pool. And that was moderately successful. And what we had decided to do down here was really basically exchange early season runoff water for late season stored water whenever we could. And that has paid off for us. We still are releasing, there's still water coming out of that limited HUP pool today. Although if we had this webinar next week, I wouldn't be able to say that because it is running out fast. So with that, Caitlin, I'll stop sharing and turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Luke. And so our final speaker is going to be Siri Roman. Siri leads Eagle River Water and Sanitation District as CEO, bringing a licensed professional engineer's technical grounding to the full scope of utility leadership, from treatment and infrastructure to regulatory strategy and long-term financial planning. With her deep experience in water and wastewater operations, she's taking on issues that define water utilities today. That work carries extra weight at the headwaters of the Colorado River in a resort community where visitor demand and seasonal swings add complexity to every decision. At the center of her work is a clear commitment protecting the Eagle River watershed and the community that depends on it. So we'll hear it from Siri now.
Great, thank you. So for us, I'll talk a little bit about municipal response, but a lot of the same things that you heard with Caleb and Luke. This is a photo. You would think that this photo was at the end of the ski season. This was not at the end of the ski season. So for us being at the headwaters, I think the one thing that's lucky is our community is so connected to snowpack because everyone's recreating on it so frequently. So this photo was pretty much mid-season. There's a lot of the mountain that did not open, or if it was open, it was just for a few days. So our community very early knew that this was going to be a rough summer. I will say that we were really lucky to have the Colorado River District come and speak to our boards in May, and they talked a lot about what Grand Valley was doing, and that really resonated to the leaders that I serve, all of my board members. And as a result of their presentation, Town of Avon, who has their own raw water diversions, changed their operations to reduce what they were pulling from the river. So a lot of people have just really wanted to do the right thing, which has made our job a lot easier. So we knew pretty early, like I said, January, the lights are flashing because it's not snowing. And then February, we started to go out and talk to community members. We had a water shortage response plan that we completed last year. There's various things that we look at. So we're looking at snowpack. We're looking at stream flows. When are we peaking? And then for us, when do we get below 100 CFS on the Eagle River was a key indicator. That happened quite early, I would say early July, if not end of June. And then reservoir content and drought severity. As everyone knows, like Eagle County is at the epicenter of this map. We are at the epicenter of the drought. So the soils are extremely dry. We've been there for quite a while. On the right, you're seeing our snowtail sites. So this is the average that we look at for the snowpack in the upper Eagle River Valley Basin. Blue line is the one for this year. Red was the previous low averages. And then black line is the median. So you can see just with that blue line, like you heard from Caleb and Luke, that 2 weeks of March was pretty crushing. I mean, it was 80 degrees up here. I was fearful that that blue line was going to keep descending. I think this is the summer of, like planning for the worst, and then maybe we got a little bit lucky. And I think that that's happened a few times. So we were really fearful that that blue line, that slope that was going down was going to go all the way to the bottom. But thankfully, April and May, we got a little more moisture, and it kind of kept that line going for a little bit. But like I said, I feel fortunate. So Eagle River Water and Sanitation District and Upper Eagle Regional Water Authority, those are the two boards I serve. We provide water from Town of Vail to Edwards, so both Vail Mountain and Beaver Creek as well. But in February, we started to actually go to all of the towns, all of the metro districts, Eagle County, and letting them know the lights are flashing. We're going into, this is going to be a really dry summer. One of the reasons why we wanted to do that early is because if you've been up into Vail or in our community, normally when you get off the highway, you'll see the roundabouts full of color and a lot of annuals. And we wanted to make sure that our community was not purchasing the annuals and not planting the annuals and making decisions early to reduce their water demand. That actually ended up being very helpful for us. We also, in our water shortage response plan, we had fines and surcharges depending on how dry things were going to be. So we wanted to let customers who use, an excess amount of water, that if you get into our tiers 4 and 5, our higher use thresholds, you'd see different surcharges and different fines. The whole point was, we don't want your money. We want the water. So the more we can educate with you to stay out of those thresholds, the better. So thankfully, we've really grown our water conservation team in the last couple of years. And so there was a lot of direct outreach to our biggest users. There was one hotel that used an excessive amount of water, and just reaching out to specific accounts, they were able to find a leak that they were able to stop. So just a lot of really customer interactions with it through this whole time. And then early April 9th, we declared a water shortage and kept the communication, and then obviously the fines and surcharges, but also working collaboratively with our community. And that's really where we saw the most success. To date, we just got our July numbers in. We've seen a 30% reduction in our water use from May through July compared to the average use of the last 3 years. Which is quite remarkable. We're really seeing irrigation accounts are down 48%, and I'll show you what that looks like. In 1 second. This is one graphic our team developed. We have these signs throughout the valley. One of the reasons is that we've asked our customers, one of the campaigns is live like a local. We know that if you live here, you know how dry it is, but we have a lot of visitors. So there's a lot of education for people that are just coming for a couple weeks, that they understand the situation. What's holding us from getting to the extreme bar is that we've been able to maintain our accounts in our in-basin reservoirs thanks to a lot of the work locally. They're little baby accounts, but that's helped us, and why we're at the very high threshold at stage 3. We have really increased education and outreach. So on social media, and on the radio, Vail Daily, however we can get with people, we will. I'll say, I think one of the really important things is there's these signs that are located, if you get off at Edwards, you'll see, this landscaping is conserving water, and it'll have Vail Health and our logo. or Beaver Creek. This is the entrance to Beaver Creek, same thing. Again, these would normally be very colorful areas, but every partner has worked so well with us to do their part. And then we've also highlighted, the upper right photo is Trevor. He's the Cordillera Metro District manager. And then we did Headwater Heroes, where different partners would talk about what they're doing. And the whole point was just to educate anyone coming that this is why we're doing it. We're doing it together to keep water in our rivers. There's a photo of a flower there. That's actually a painted pine cone. One landscaper wanted to put color in her customers' gardens, and so she started to paint pine cones and develop flowers. But people just got really creative. I'll say that I think our biggest supporters are actually our landscapers. They've done a fantastic job carrying this message for us. The River District, we've been talking to them super closely, and I know there's a lot of push to go to 1 day a week watering. I would say for us, we've been following the data. We're at 2 days a week watering, and we intentionally wanted to stay that way for a couple of reasons. We wanted to follow the data, but also a lot of our homes that have excessive users are operated by landscapers. So it's not so easy to change your settings. That's going to take like several weeks, if not months, to roll out. But the other thing too is the landscapers early on wanted to know, how should we set our timers? We want to set it. And we also believed we'd be more efficient because our soils are so dry, watering twice a week in targeted areas instead of 1 day a week. The run times would have gone longer. It would have been more inefficient because of the soils being so dry. We thought it would run off. I think you can see by the results, this has worked really well for us. But the other thing that I think utilities need to consider is operations. We have a very complex operating system with, over 70 pressure zones, almost 50 drinking water tanks, and it's also very high fire danger. So I don't want to hit our tanks with customer demand just 1 day a week, or maybe 2 if it's odd even days, depending on your address. We really want to balance that in case there is a fire. So these are the things as a utility that that you have to consider as you make these decisions. But in general, this shows you our production. We get this data weekly as opposed to billing data, which is monthly. Red is 2024, black 2025, and then really blue is what we're seeing for customer demand. So the water, I should say this is production, so the water coming out of our facilities that's treated. As you look at the beginning of the graph, that's indoor use, and then you're going to see the peak for outdoor irrigation. We know that indoor use, that comes back to our wastewater treatment facilities. Our operators clean it, return it to the streams. So most of that water gets back to the river. We were much more focused on outdoor irrigation. But the drop is quite dramatic from last year to this year with outdoor irrigation. Like I said, 48% in outdoor irrigation drop. And I think people are watering trees. It's very targeted. I like to quote Scott Curry from CSU. He was in the Colorado Sun several weeks ago and said, "Embrace the beige." And if you drive up here, our community has embraced the beige. There is very little green. Everything is beige. The landscape is beige. And we're super proud of the community. And I think it's really important, especially now we're entering in this time where it's hard to see how low the rivers, Gore Creek and the Eagle River are. And, I definitely take solace that we did everything we could to keep water in the rivers, but I'm certainly hoping that we get some more moisture because the streams are warm, the flows are extremely low, which I know everyone is experiencing, but for us, now it's hard to see. This is just one more thing, is these are our different tiers of water use, and these are the reductions that we've seen. So like I said, most of our customers, I'd say 80%, use water reasonably. We have about 20% that get into tiers 4 and 5, and it's not uncommon that these would not be their first home. So this is reaching out to property owners, landscapers. We're aware that these customers may not see their invoices, but that's pretty remarkable seeing the reductions in tier 4 and 5. On the left is Betty Ford Garden, and then, just kind of, or Alpine Gardens, but just seeing the messaging. So really everywhere you walk, you're seeing some kind of messaging to our visitors, letting them know what we're all experiencing. So with that, like I said, we're really pleased with the response of our community. We do feel like the Western Slope is all in this together, and hearing what Grand Valley did with curtailing their use earlier, even, encouraged us even more. So It is really hard to see the rivers. You're seeing the fish really struggle. I know there's voluntary fishing closures. I'm hoping people will stop fishing because I don't think the fish can withstand the stress of being caught and then put back right now. But keeping an eye on everything and already kind of telling customers like, okay, start planning for next year. It's not going to be going back to business as usual. I think everyone needs to, make different decisions, embrace perennials and landscaping that looks more like what the mountain is on their side. And I say that just because the north side and south side for us is very different. But that's just a little summary of Eagle River. So thank you.
Thank you, Siri, and thank you also to Luke and Caleb. So we're going to shift to Q&A now. So I'll invite everyone to hop into the chat and type in your questions. Or if you want to raise your hand using the button in Zoom, I can call on you. But I have one question as you start kind of typing yours in. So I'd like to circle back with all of our panelists if you haven't already spoken to it, and Siri kind of did. Can you share where things have landed late this summer, kind of like now and into the near future, and maybe looking beyond this season into next year and the farther future? Have you learned anything, or does this set you up for anything beyond the scope of this specific drought program?
Yeah, I'll jump in first, Caitlin. It's a good question, and I think where we are right now in the Grand Valley and for the Grand Valley Water Users Association and Orchard Mesa Irrigation District is, our we're just about to run out of reservoir supplies from the HUP pool. Those will be exhausted here, probably about the next week. And so, as Caleb mentioned earlier, we're really starting to pull pretty hard on that 15,000 acre feet that the River District had set aside for Grand Valley irrigators. And so, we were hopeful that we wouldn't get there. We'd be, there'd be enough monsoon moisture. But knowing we had that 15,000 acre feet, kind of in our back pocket, so to speak, for late August has been very helpful in motivating for some of the conservation operations. The Grand Valley is just now starting to approach the end of peach harvest, and that was a big goal, especially for Orchard Mesa Irrigation District, to get through peach harvest with enough water in all of in both of their canals that the growers would have access to that to finish a crop. So that's, we've met that goal. We continue to work towards the goal of having irrigation supply in all of the canals through the 1st of September. And I think if we are fortunate enough to get a little bit of monsoon activity, we should reach that goal of September 1st. I think as we, survive this year and approach the next and subsequent years, I think we've learned a number of things about our infrastructure in the Grand Valley and how far we can push certain pieces of that and where we will need to make some pretty substantial improvements if we expect more years like this. And then I think another thing we've really done is develop some of the relationships and continued some of those relationships and fortified them in a way that allows us to, get through a year like this. And so that's been a positive thing for us.
I guess just to tack on to that, Caitlin, I think, as we've kind of alluded to, I think we've done a pretty good job mitigating the impacts of drought to the greatest extent possible this year. With that being said, we've absolutely utilized reservoir storage, frankly, for the purpose it was designed for, to get through years like this. With that being said, and I don't want to color the end of this pessimistically, but I do think it's important for us all to recognize that we're not out of the woods by any means. Another poor winter, especially one as poor as last winter, would certainly be a cause for concern going into next year. So I think that's just always important to recognize that, we used reservoir storage to the greatest extent possible to mitigate impacts this year. But certainly, again, we're always looking for the future and hoping to replenish some of that storage, some, if not all, if not more than we had moving forward, just to ensure that we're properly set up for the next drought. In regard to the lessons learned, I just continue to think about the importance of collaboration, especially amongst a diversity of water users here on the West Slope. I focused my conversation specific to the 15,000 acre feet of river district supplies, and I do see a question from Kate that I might hit on a little bit. But certainly we have partners, throughout the division, whether it's Pitkin County with some water, even small amounts of water from Twin Lakes shares, Grand County with water from Lake Granby, working with the Water Trust, the irrigators in the Water Trust to utilize some contract water from Rudai Reservoir, utilizing Rudai Reservoir supplies from Ute Water. I just think it's really a demonstration of collaboration throughout the division that has been just so incredibly great to see and so incredibly helpful to mitigate these impacts. So I think that'll continue to be, something that we look for moving forward to get through these difficult times.
Siri, do you have anything to add to this one?
No, I think I already did. Thank you.
Okay. So we've gotten lots of great questions in. I'm going to scroll back up to the top of them. So the first one was from Axel. He says, I'm a student out of curiosity about how things work. How are you able to, this is for Siri, how are you able to help users identify the water use issue as a leak versus general use?
No, that's a great question. I think the first thing is making sure that you have smart meters. So I think it's extremely important that customers have real-time access to their data. I don't think every utility has this quite yet. But for us, you have a portal and you can log on and see your use. It's a slightly delayed. But generally, a leak, you can get flagged. So you can sign up for this. You can get alerts. And a leak, if it's depending on what it is, there's an algorithm that shows your historic use, and then it'll change if there's a leak and it's a constant flow at a certain pace. It'll be able to trigger it, and so really for our customers when they're traveling, they really like that tool because it could be a toilet, the flapper's open, that's not that much water, but if they are seeing something else, they'll get alerted. The one that I mentioned was a little bit trickier because it was a hotel. So when there's multiple different types of water use, we just kind of flagged to them that you're going to get in tier 5 and your fines are going to be very high if you don't change things. So that's actually having someone from our team walk their system with them. And then pretty quickly, if you have the right experts with you walking the system, you can flag things. We had one customer who used, this is a residential account, over 1 million gallons per year. So we reached out to their property manager and walked their site. And it was a very large property. Their water softeners were in constant flush mode. So they were just constantly flushing water from the system. So it's kind of, there's simple ways to find it, but then a lot of times you just need, like, something's off with this water use. And especially if it's when you're not there or, those are the kinds of questions, but certainly starting with the data.
Thank you. And I'm going to keep reading these, but if any of the people who pose the questions feel like you want to elaborate or hop in for discussion, you're welcome to. So next up, we have a question from Kate Ryan for Caleb, which you mentioned, Caleb. If you were to gain more supplies like the Moser contract water, how much would you need to really make a difference to water users downstream?
That's a really good question, Kate. It's hard for me to put a finger on exactly how much would be considered making a difference. I guess my initial response is I think every drop counts, frankly. So I think, any amount of water. I spoke briefly to Pitkin County and some Twin Lakes shares that Pitkin County acquired that we used a portion of for the emergency SWSP. But frankly, even I think which was amounted to maybe 44 acre feet, but that's frankly 44 more acre feet that was then made available to the Grand Valley irrigators for the irrigation pool by utilizing it in the emergency SWSP. So as far as I'm concerned, I think frankly every drop counts, given especially how tightly constrained we are on water, especially in drought years like this.
Next, we have a question from Wendell Kuntz. Caleb or Luke, any word on when the Bureau of Reclamation will release the record of decision? There are 50 days remaining until October 1st.
Your guess is as good as mine, Wendell. I would say I think we suspect it imminently, but as you suggested, we're quickly running up to October 1st, but I would imagine my understanding was that it was going to be released shortly thereafter, the final EIS. So
I'll probably Google it right when we're done with this meeting and see if it was released. I'll email it to you if it was, Wendell.
Now a question from Troy. He says, Caleb, what is the current forecast for the lifespan of 15,000 acre foot ESWSP pool? Solely replacement of municipal domestic depletions, correct? And then he had a
yes,
follow-up. Can you provide insight regarding post August 31st when current ESWSP expires?
yeah, I can definitely. Thanks for that question, Troy. So yeah, the River District has allocated supplies out of that 15,000 acre feet, not only for the current version of the emergency substitute water supply plan, which is approved through the end of August, but also for future iteration or versions of either an emergency substitute water supply plan or a traditional substitute water supply plan. So the plan is to continue the emergency and or traditional substitute water supply plan through the end of next Green Mountain fill season. So we will be covering those municipal and domestic depletions with 1 day per week outdoor watering through that time period. I would say there's a little bit of nuance related to who will be covering and when under that, given that it's my understanding like the historic user pool beneficiaries will be covered through the winter period with supplies in Green Mountain Reservoir. But that's generally the plan that the River District plans to continue to obtain new approvals to cover the period until Green Mountain fills next season.
Until they're assuming it's gonna fill.
I am assuming it. Fingers crossed it will fill.
A question from Adam Swicklin. People are looking to next year. We need to frame the conversation. Are there 2-year reservoir storage projections for Green Mountain Reservoir and Lake Granby?
I don't, not that I've seen the Bureau put together. I think it wouldn't be that hard I mean, you could just overlay this year on current storage and it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, I think one difficulty there is it's so largely driven by this upcoming winter snowpack that I think you could have a pretty large range of outcomes depending on what that snowpack looks like. But a very good point, Adam, and certainly something that I think we should all be cognizant of looking forward.
Yeah, I was kind of looking for like those Lake Powell and Mead graphs that we see with the low projection, the high projection, and the average projection, just to frame the conversations. Because as you just said, we have our fingers crossed. Green Mountain's going to fill again, and that's a hard way to put it to people.
No, I hear you loud and clear. I appreciate the comment.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I think, I'll add to that a little bit. I think, the Bureau does there's a most probable, they'll have a kind of a 3-tiered heading into the fill season. And I suspect the group's going to want that to be a little bit more sophisticated, because the way the March temperatures impacted how much of the snow water equivalent accumulated in Green Mountain Reservoir, I think was very surprising. Just how poor. I mean, the runoff efficiency it wasn't something that we would have expected based on any historical data. So I think there's some adjustments to that need to be made, and these drought years are very informative.
Wendy asks, do you foresee Green Mountain Reservoir operations changing in the future to accommodate the storage trapped by the Heaney slide? Is there an engineering solution? Cameo reduced demands to store more historic user pool water that now cannot be released.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one a little bit. I think I don't anticipate that there will be any HUP water that's stranded in that reservoir after the irrigation season. I think it's there's a limited release capacity, so we aren't able to utilize it as fast as we would like. And it is disappointing and it's impactful to operations and it's impactful to the irrigation users. But there isn't so much in that reservoir that we won't be able to get it all out at the reduced release rates. I mean, I guess we could, had we fully filled, well, no, the math wouldn't have worked out, but it's not going to be stranded. It's just not, we're not able to utilize it in the time frame that we would prefer, but we will still utilize it. As far as engineering solutions, I think that's a question that needs to be posed to the Bureau. It is really difficult to be in this type of a drought year and have a reservoir that doesn't function very well.
Another question from Troy. This one's for Siri. Does Eagle River Water and Sanitation District rely on HUP replacement to any extent?
We actually used our accounts in Wolford for our HUP HCUs. So we have and not. We were able to use our contract water. But I do think it's really important that, as we evolve and like we were saying, learn from this, focusing on the data of water use reduction than just days of the week, I think is super important. I think it's kind of a future as we go is let's talk numbers, let's talk data, let's make sure every utility has access to that data. And I also saw just a question about what was it? This soil moisture. That's we've had a lot of people talk about smart moisture sensors for irrigation. I think it can cut both ways. So we haven't, yes, it shuts off if you get rain, but it also will call if it's dry. So that's one that we have customers that are very interested in, but we're also like with how dry the soils have been since last summer, it would probably be asking for more moisture than we would like. So that's kind of something that we're still reviewing.
A question from Evan for Luke. Have the Orchard Mesa Irrigation District users been on reduced allocations for the peach growing season?
Yes, it's a good question. And yes, in all of the irrigation systems down here, there's been, the vocabulary each district or canal company uses might be different, but there's restrictions or other reductions in basically in access. If you drive around Orchard Mesa, you'll see the head gates they've got a red tag on them. They've been reduced in how much water they can take at any time from a head gate. I will say on that system, I think this year's been very telling. A lot of the peach orchards and the vineyards are on micro sprinkler and drip irrigation, and that higher efficiency, those higher efficiency irrigation systems really do help in a year like this. There's a lot more hours and a lot more labor has been put into irrigating this year to utilize those higher efficiency systems, but it's been a help. But to answer your question directly, yes, everybody's been on pretty much some type of restriction since the first day.
A question, more of a statewide question. I don't know if any of our speakers know the answer or if anyone else on the call has an answer. Do we understand how Colorado has done overall on voluntary water conservation use of water through this April 1st to August 1st timeframe compared to other states like Arizona, et cetera?
I guess I don't have a whole lot of insight. Anecdotally, I do see, and this isn't necessarily voluntary, but certainly, I was just speaking with one of our constituents, the town of Crested Butte, last week, and that entity engaged in some pretty aggressive marketing campaign early in the season regarding mandatory watering restrictions. And I would say from their viewpoint, those have worked out very well in that they've reduced demand 30 to 40%, kind of similar to what Siri was showing with Eagle River Water and Sand. So I do, and again, that doesn't speak directly to the question about voluntary conservation measures, but I do think when the appropriate outreach is made, communication, as well as following up after the fact with enforcement to the greatest extent possible, it does seem to me to make a pretty meaningful difference, at least in the communities here on the West Slope that I've spoken with. I think there might be mixed results throughout the, around the state. But as far as the information I've been receiving anecdotally from some of our communities, we have seen pretty good results from these measures.
I'm confident we've done better than Arizona.
Way done better. Yes.
That would be an interesting one to dig into more.
I'm not sure if Arizona has watering restrictions, frankly.
It's not a term they're familiar with.
I think one last question from John. With high temperatures and low soil moisture, how can you anticipate close to average reservoir filling?
I mean, I think that point's well taken, John. I think it would take a much above average snowfall to generate even a small above average runoff to generate the amount of water necessary to fill some of these reservoirs. So yeah, I agree with you that both high temperatures and low soil moisture are definitely going to have implications to how water comes off next spring.
And then we had one last kind of response in the chat. So this was back to Adam's question. I'll just read it aloud. Brian, if you want to say anything. So this was Brian Craig here. USBR releases a 2-year forecast every November. As Caleb said, it's very driven by snow. One good year can fill both reservoirs. USBR uses a median year and a 10% and 90% exceedance for the 3 plans. So it's really just wet, dry, average years put on current snow storage rather than prediction of snowpack. If anyone needs to say more about that, you guys are welcome to hop in. And if not, does anyone have other questions? Anything else we haven't addressed? Speakers or folks listening in? And if not, I want to thank everyone for being here. It was really interesting, great questions, great answers, great discussion, and kind of look forward to kind of hearing what comes next, tracking the forecast in the future. Thanks everyone for being here. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks.